Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Bob Hendershot. I teach history here at the college. And this afternoon, it is my honor to introduce our speaker, Professor Susan Williams. And just a few details about the academic who's about to present her research and analysis to you today. Professor Williams took her Master of Arts at the University of Cincinnati, specializing in modern and early modern European history. And she's currently ABD at the University of Indiana in Bloomington, where her research has led her to specialize in modern East European history and, of course, in the history of gender and sexuality, with a minor in Russian and Eastern European studies. A highly noteworthy academic CV is what Professor Williams has. She is, for example, a Fulbright scholar, right, having been funded for years of research in Eastern Europe, primarily in Romania, by the Fulbright organization, and as well as the Mellon Foundation, too. She's also built an impressive record of publication and has a whole string of publications with various journals, including the East Europe Review and the Journal of Romani Studies. Here at GRCC, she teaches a variety of courses, including both halves of the European History Survey, as well as specialized courses on the history of Russia and Eastern Europe, the history of gender and sexuality, and also a seminar on World War I and the interwar period. She's also been very active in the Irish Studies program that we've had going the past 2 years, taking groups of students to the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. But today she's presenting her paper entitled I Am a Woman's Rights, and we'll be following the symposium format today, and so please do hold your excellent questions to the end, and we can have a conversation there, and we'll pass the microphone around so that your questions can be picked up as well. So yes, please help me to welcome Professor Susan Williams.
Well, thank you for the nice introduction. And I'm really excited to be part of the social science department. We do this race and ethnicity conference every year, and so by all means, look for us again next year. I think it's really great that our department in particular is really passionate about these issues. And under the direction of Mike Light, who's our bulldog in this. I mean, he's the one who really gives us that energy and that guidance, and he's the main organizer for this. And so, well, I was just talking to my gender and sexuality students about, in class about how this was kind of an evolving project, and even the title. I was like, I don't like the title anymore, so I'm just going to change it. Right? When I was a little girl, I can start off with just a kind of a personal story here. When I was a little girl, my mom was really serious about education. That's because she grew up really poor. She grew up in Appalachia on an egg farm of all things. And so she took education very seriously, and she would make sure to take us to the library at the very least once a week, if not twice a week, to go and get as many books as we wanted to. And I was always drawn, being a history nerd genetically from birth or something, I was always drawn to this one little section where they had these biographies of famous women. And these were written, a great deal to 1970s and 1980s feminists. These books were written particularly to recover women's history, but to give it in a format that young women such as myself could understand. And so I was always drawn to these books. I always wanted to read more about these famous women. And I'd always go and torture my teachers with what I had learned. So I'd run to class, and I remember at one point saying that, oh, this week I read a biography about Elizabeth I, and I'm going to be Queen Elizabeth I one day. And if anybody who knows me, there's a lot of people who know me here, and they know I try. But it was really interesting because the teacher's response, a good teacher, she very sagely told me that, yes, if you try really, really hard, you can be whatever you want to be. Right? I could indeed just be just like her. So then, and I, burned into my conversation, I've been thinking about this more and more in the past couple of weeks as I prepared this paper. I remember another conversation with her about the same little books. I had read a book about Ida B. Wells. Who knows who Ida B. Wells is? I'm going to talk about her today, if you don't. She's a very famous 19th century, going into the 20th century, African-American investigative journalist. And like I said, we'll pursue her a little bit further as I go forward. But I read this, and that was it. I didn't want to be Elizabeth I anymore. I want to be Ida B. Wells. I thought she was awesome. I go to my teacher. I tell her, I'm gonna be just like her. I was gonna be an investigative journalist. I was gonna report about social injustices. I was gonna change the United States. And the teacher looked at me and said, "You can't be Ida B. Wells." And I said, "Why?" And she said, "Because she's black." Which is really odd, right? The idea that, wait a minute, so I can be a 16th century queen, but I can't be Ida B. Wells. So that's one thing that's always struck me. And I remember, even going through and studying gender and sexuality and everything else, it's one of those memories that'll come back occasionally that you just remember, it comes back in your head, then you just cast it aside again because it doesn't make sense. It never has made sense. I've realized that since from my very first experiences with feminism, those first experiences involved the color line. And it's been something that's been extraordinarily important for me to pursue and to talk about. It wasn't until my graduate career that I actually started to kind of pull myself out of books. It's really easy to read a lot, but never sit there and think about what does this mean to me right now in 2012? What does this mean with how I see the world? And I sometimes thought back in that time, again and again, to that conversation with that teacher, and I would just shake my head. And it's not until relatively recently that I've really started to unpack that conversation. And it used to be when I was a young feminist that I would always think, why can't people just work to overthrow the patriarchy? Why can't we work about that issue of male domination? That's really what we should all be concerned with. But it's that conversation with that teacher and what I'm going to talk about today, that really does inform me. You can sit there and complain as much as you want about the politics of difference and how it hinders movements, but it's through the understanding of people's different experiences and how they see movements that you have true social change. And that's what I'm going to be looking at today. And I'm also going to talk a bit about what this means for us right now, right? Outside of books, outside of historic experience, outside of case studies. What does this mean for you? So I'm going to use feminism as a case study. I'm going to talk about a few people. I'm going to talk about that issue that's near and dear to my heart to think about. But it's not just that one conversation. I've been talking to my gender studies students this semester about how I'm really getting frustrated with feminism. And I can show you an image, and I'm sorry if the image shocks you, but it's an important image to unpack and to think about, and we're going to come back to this image and think about how, in God's name, could this happen? And that's this image. This image was taken 5 months ago in New York City during a protest march called a slut walk. And has anybody heard of slut walks before? So a few people here have. And the whole idea was, it's largely groups of white feminists, not all, but white feminists, typically with a middle-class background, who started to argue that they needed to take back the word slut. And they were going to, and whatever you think about that, however you react to it, that was their objective. That's what they wanted to accomplish. And so what they would do is they would dress in slinky clothing, and they would march with signs to try to really challenge rape culture in particular, the way people talk about women, the way people talk about power in the United States, the way people talk about young women's sexuality. All well and good, but this is the sign that showed up. And that sign has really got me thinking in the past 5 months. And there was a point that I went through where I got really scared that we failed, that feminism failed. Because if young women are walking around New York City with signs like this, then that means there's something intrinsically wrong with the movement. Now, you might have looked at this sign and you might have said, well, come on. I mean, anybody know what song or who wrote that song? It's the title of a song. John Lennon and Yoko Ono. And there were some people in the dialogues about this sign that said, oh, but it's John Lennon and Yoko Ono. They can never mean anything bad. Give peace a chance, right? And when there was a really fabulous discussion on a variety of different feminist boards online. Best one, if you want to look more into this, those discussions, was a board called Racialicious, which is a fabulous, fabulous blog online. There was a lot of people who took up for this young woman. And they said, well, that word doesn't really mean anything. Well, we're reclaiming that word as well. Well, it was John Lennon, and you can't yell about John Lennon because he's all about peace. Well, Yoko Ono wrote it as well, and she's not white. there was just this tone deafness. And no matter how many times African-American women would come onto those blogs and unpack it in this beautiful language, deconstruct and unpack why there are so many problems with a young white feminist who says that she's for peace, that she's for equality, that would carry this sign. Right? I mean, I'm still stunned by it to this day. And no matter how many amazing things that they had to say, how much time they would spend in deconstructing this for people and explaining to people why it is not okay to use this word, why it's not okay to defend somebody who uses this word, why there's something intrinsically wrong with the feminist movement if people are supporting the use of this word in a march in New York City 5 months ago. And it didn't matter because they would just get shut down every time. And whether people said, oh, but I'm not a racist, but, right, which is a famous statement. Or I'm a feminist, how can you say this to another sister? There was just this complete disconnect in conversation that was going on these boards. And so today I kind of want to explain, I want to look at case studies. I want to think about early black feminists in particular. I want to think about what they offered the feminist movement to just educate people on this. But I also want to think about concepts about diversity and privilege as we get towards the end here. So for those of you who haven't really thought about feminism a lot, I always like to introduce it a bit. So, it's awesome, right? So, feminism is very personal. Some people describe it in different ways than others. You don't shut those people down because they don't necessarily agree with you, right? But for me, this is a great bell hooks quote. I'm going to talk about bell hooks a little bit later on in this presentation. But feminism is not simply a struggle to end male chauvinism or a movement to ensure that women have equal rights with men. It is a commitment to eradicating the ideology of domination that permeates Western culture on various levels, whether it's sex, race, class, to name a few, and a commitment to reorganizing U.S. society so that self-development of people can take precedence over imperialism, economic expansion, and material desires. Feminism is that to me. It's bigger than just male domination or issues of patriarchy. It's not that to others, and that's all right too, right? It's all about what it means to you and why it's important to you. They were laughing if you can't read this in the back. It is not feminists. They make sandwiches of hate, right? It is also not this to me. You see this sign and you see this bumper sticker ever, and it actually makes my eye twitch in the corner. It's so simple, right? It sounds so great. Everybody wants a hug, right, when you read this sign. Feminism is the radical notion that women are people. What do you think's wrong with that? Y'all are like, I like it. I don't know what you're talking about. Maybe you have a guess? Maybe you have a reaction to it? I just scared you because I just talked to the audience. I broke the cardinal rule of speaking. Even if you're not a feminist, do you believe that women are people? I mean, it's pretty obvious, right? I don't think people who aren't identifying themselves as feminists are stupid and just think like, I don't know, there's me and I'm a person and you, I don't know what you are, right?
Women are just, it's kind of hard to explain, but it really is mocking feminism.
Well, the thing is, though, it's feminists who use this.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Yeah, right? See, you're having the same reaction I have to it. It's so simplistic. It's so easy. Everybody should be a feminist. It's like luring them in with candy or something, right? The idea, that if you're not a feminist, if you don't see yourself as a feminist, if you unpack this, if you say, maybe, I'd really like to think about this term more, well, you don't think I'm a human being, so I can't talk to you anymore. Feminism, if you think about this versus that bell hooks quote that I just looked at, whether or not you agree with it or not, that's feminism. I mean, that's complication. That's the intricacies of what we're talking about. That's society, right? That's domination. This is weird. Right? Oh, and it is also not this. I'm not a feminazi. I know people just love that term. Feminazi, because wanting your gender to be treated like human beings is just like invading Poland. God love Rush Limbaugh for coming up and really pushing that term hard. But But you know, this again, we're going to talk about conversations and creating spaces to have conversations. This is one of those, like, and I've been called a feminazi before, and either I giggle maniacally and I can't stop because I'm just picturing this, right? Or like me and a little mustache or something, I don't know. Or like, I mean, it just shuts down the whole conversation. That to me is like, why would I even talk to you at this point if you've decided, because I said, I don't know, I really think that Republicans should stay out of my vagina, that I'm a feminazi, right? I know, I'm sorry. It's all like on tape, you know. They're gonna like bleep it out or something. So, we have our little primer for feminism. We've already done that. If you haven't critically studied feminism before, I can go over my kind of feminism in a nutshell, which will horrify all feminists ever, but whatever, I like doing that. So there are 3 waves of feminism and maybe a 4th wave, but we're not going to believe that 4th wave nonsense. So the first wave of feminism, in a nutshell, that's all about getting the vote. That's all the ladies before 1920 in the United States. They are focused largely, not completely, but largely on getting the vote for women in the United States. Second wave, you know, feminism kind of dies out for a little while. It's still around, but a lot of the feminists who got the vote went home after they got the vote. They didn't really, and this will get back into our story again as we start setting up the case example. But they're not, you know, they're not really too interested in helping, say, black women who are living under Jim Crow and never really got the vote, for example. The second wave of feminism picks up right around the 1930s, 1940s. It's really going to get loud and proud in the 1970s and 1980s. Those are the women, if you like to go to college and pick what you get to do, you owe them a personalized thank you note if you're a woman, because they're the ones who made that happen. They're the ones who broke the glass ceiling. They're the ones who really challenged the legal and social issues for women in the United States. But they also did not create, and that's one of the big complaints about second wave feminism. They didn't create safe spaces. They didn't create a you know, more global or a more inclusive atmosphere of feminism. Their feminism, just like largely the first wave, this was a language of white middle-class women. Right? And when other people challenged that and said, I think that we need to expand this. I think we need to think bigger. I think we need to think about social change. I think we need to think about African Americans. I think we need to think about the working poor in the United States. Typically, those voices were shut down. And people were told that, but we're creating a movement that has a focus, right, on patriarchy, on domination, on sexualization. Those arguments are about other movements, right? And we're going to critique that today. Third wave starts in about the 1990s. I'm a third wave feminist. The whole deal with third wave feminism is we were supposed to solve all the other problems. We were going to create a global movement. It was going to be anti-racist. It was going to be concerned with poverty. It was going to be focused on social justice. We were going to win. That's my big complaint, though, about feminism, is that we said we would do this. At least the other 2 groups didn't say they were going to do this. We promised we were going to do this. We made commitments that we were going to do this, and you saw that picture. We're failing. Right? And so part of the talk today is going to be all about, can we possibly fix this? Post-feminism, that is a weird topic. So post-feminists have been declaring that feminism is dead since the 1920s. Right? The women who got the vote said, we're done. Awesome. We win. And then every generation after that, you'll have people constantly talk about how we don't need feminism anymore. We need to think outside of feminism. I don't like that. You know, young people today, I don't like the term feminism. It has such bad connotations to it. Right? That's kind of a post-feminist critique, which we can talk about a little bit later as well. So I wanted to think, one of the things I'm going to talk about today towards the end is the concept of privilege. And I want to think specifically with you. I mean, I want to think about the issue of kind of cognizant dissonance, or dissonance. I can't even talk today, right? The idea that, you know, there's so many things going on in our lives. There's so many things going on in our brain. And a lot of those things sometimes feel like they don't go together. But that's the time to have the conversation to see if they can't, right? But what's been happening in feminism is the idea that, no, we have our platform. We're going in this direction. and all those other things, they don't make sense to me within this, and I don't want to do a lot of thought, and I don't want to bring those ideas together, so I'm just going to disregard things, right? And that's one of the major problems that we've got to talk about today. So I'm going to start back in the day. I'm going to pick a few representatives from these different movements to talk about how, had we paid, I mean, this is kind of my, one of my theses here. Had we actually paid attention to early feminists, we would have been leaps and bounds ahead of where we are now. We wouldn't still be having this conversation. We definitely wouldn't have people carrying signs like that in New York City during feminist marches. Right? So we can talk about Sojourner Truth. Sojourner Truth is a fascinating character. She, for those of you who might not know her, you might not be native to Michigan, she died in Battle Creek. She's buried there. There's a memorial to her there. And I have to say, I always like to talk about why I pick the sources that I pick. I pick people that I really like and I like to talk about. There's tons of people you could talk about in any of these movements. Sojourner Truth is fascinating for the fact, just her biography. She grew up in slavery in New York. She spoke Dutch until the age of 9. She was illiterate for most of her life. She didn't know how to read or write. She's a fascinating individual because of the fact that she changes her name. The reason she calls herself Sojourner Truth is she believes that God touched her. She believes that God gave her a message, and that message was about abolition. But it's also, when she talks about abolition, to her, abolition isn't just getting the votes for women. Abolition is complete freedom for men and women, right? It's the acknowledgement that everybody is an equal citizen. The reason I bring her into this, not just because of her fascinating biography, not just because she was a good, she was a good speech writer, but what happened to her? So Sojourner Truth was famous on the circuit for feminism and abolition. They would invite her in to speak quite often. And of course, her most famous speech is called the Ain't I a Woman speech. And I'm sure a lot of you, how many people have read the Ain't I a Woman speech before? A lot of people, right? Were you a little bit surprised to find out that Sojourner Truth's from New York and has a Dutch accent? So, this is one of my issues that I want to talk about here. This is actually the first it's the first transcription of Sojourner Truth by one of her friends that she works with on an anti-slavery blog. A blog, oh my gosh, I'm like living in 2 different time periods, aren't I? The Anti-Slavery Bugle, that'd be awesome, in 1851. So she'd worked with Marius Robinson a lot. We could some people, when people analyze this, they say, we can probably trust this pretty well since she's worked with him in the past before she made this speech. Does this speech look anything like the Ain't I a Woman speech that you might remember? What's different about it? Oh, like, this isn't class. I don't have to answer. Yeah.
It seems like it was more it wasn't written by her, you can obviously tell in the way that it's articulated. Like, she had changed, obviously, a lot of, made it more proper.
You mean the person who's transcribing this speech, Marius Robinson, was making it more proper?
Yeah.
Okay. Why do you say that?
Because it doesn't seem like it came from somebody who was illiterate.
Okay, so you see a little bit of where they're tinkering with the language a bit. Anything else? What's not in this speech? The whole term "ain't I a woman" isn't in this speech. I mean, it's vaguely there, right? But there are certain words that are just completely missing that you would totally expect to see in this speech in general. That's because 11 years later, a woman named Frances Gage rewrote the speech, and she used Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin, apparently, as her kind of how she would imagine black people to sound. So what you read in textbooks, this is the first, they've cleaned it up a little bit in textbooks now, but this is the reprint from that first time that this is republished in a feminist history. So here's a white feminist who's very, very famous. You might not have heard of her before. She's on all the circuits and everything else. She's rewritten Marius's account, right, of this speech, and she's given it this Southern, poor black, this Uncle Tom's Cabin's voice. She stole Sojourner Truth's voice. And you see this over and over and over again. You still see it to this day. There were just charges, and for a person who will remain unnamed, let's put it that way, you can Google as much as you want, you'll find it, where there was a person who was intellectually stealing property, in all likelihood, allegedly, whatever, from black women's blogs, and then getting book contracts and republishing those ideas. Very hard to prove philosophical plagiarism, that you stole somebody's ideas. But the ideas from this woman's blog showed up in publication for a book that was published by a major printing press. And the person who wrote the book was white and middle class. Right? So you see this pattern repeated over and over and over again, that you take a black woman, you recast her words to have meaning and value to your movement, and then you disregard them from the story from that point on. Sojourner Truth, what's so impactful, I think, to people about her ideas, and it is her ideas, the ideas are still there. Once you unpack all this language and everything else, and you boil this down to the main points, I mean, Sojourner Truth is talking about the equality of the soul, right? She's talking about the equality of the human being. If you are poor, or you are black, or you are white, you deserve dignity, and you deserve to be treated as a human being and as a citizen in the United States. That's what's so powerful. So again, I want you to think about that lesson as well. Sojourner Truth knows that feminism is bigger than male domination or patriarchy. Right? She knows it. She says it regularly. She says it in this speech, right? Or maybe we'll get the better one up there again. But she says it in this speech. But people don't listen. There are people who push for the Equal Rights Amendment during this period of time. They're largely ignored and told that they're going too far. There are people who try to push the idea that maybe you need to listen to black women. Maybe they have something to offer here that's deeper than what you're getting. They're digging deeper. They have a different experience that can actually benefit the movement rather than take away from the movement. But again, they're not going to be listened to. Ida B. Wells, she's my favorite. She's one I'm not allowed to be, according to my teacher. Yeah, I hope that person's watching. I like how everybody's like, ooh. So Ida B. Wells is absolutely amazing. If you're really interested in reading some of her writings, they're available for free on Project Gutenberg. So you can look up this book in particular. It's there. It's brilliantly written. Ida B. Wells is really famous for the fact that she's the first person to actually extensively analyze lynchings. 3 of her friends were killed. They owned a store that was competing with a white store in Memphis, and they were arrested on trumped-up charges, and they were pulled out of the jail and lynched. At that point, she had kind of found her calling for investigative journalism. She went through and actually took newspapers and took newspaper reports. She analyzed specific lynchings. She gave numbers. She gave evidence. She rationally analyzed lynching. Because people would tell black people that they made it up in the period before this, or that they were over-exaggerated, they were getting too emotional about it. So this, the Southern Horrors book, and there's another book called The Red Horrors. You can find both of them, totally worth a read. But this is one way she made her name for herself, is the fact that she's the first person to get people to really honestly be forced to pay attention to lynchings to this degree. She goes to England, for example, and gives speeches there. So they put pressure on the United States. I mean, that's the whole idea behind it. She's also active in the this is a great quote by her. One had better die fighting against injustice than die like a dog or a rat in a trap. Right? It's extraordinarily powerful language that Ida B. Wells uses. Ida B. Wells was also active in the feminist movement, the first wave of feminism. So to get the vote and to possibly look into getting the Equal Rights Amendment passed in the Constitution. She also finds herself regularly going directly up against other feminists, white feminists, middle-class feminists. During this period of time. A great example of that is when she goes to England, she goes up against Frances Willard. Frances Willard, I've got a great quote, not great quote, because she's a big old racist, but it's a really telling quote. One of the things that, Frances Willard was kind of this notorious by, everybody's inviting her to their house. Everybody wants to hear her speech. They call her speak. They call her the queen of American democracy. She's really selling the tale of America in Great Britain during this period of time. Ida B. Wells comes over to start doing speeches about lynching. And she comes in direct conflict with Frances Willard. Frances Willard, as I said before, is a racist. The quote that I was going to read you, "The colored race multiplies like the locusts of Egypt. The grog shop so in other words, the pub, right, is its center of power. The safety of women, of childhood, of the home is menaced in 1,000 localities. She justifies lynchings. Ida B. Wells, being Ida B. Wells, and one of the reasons she is one of my favorites, called her out on it in a public forum and told her that you can't be the queen of American democracy and support lynchings. What happened effectively, Frances Willard is going to use all of her contacts in England, and those contacts are going to make sure that the press does not republish anything that Ida B. Wells says from that point on. They're not going to highlight any of her talks. They're not going to announce her talks. She shuts down her voice. Ida B. Wells, the New York Times, I wonder if I have this quote, if you want to get a sense about what people are writing about her. The New York Times, when she publishes her anti-lynching books, they say Wells was, quote, a slanderous and nasty-minded mulatress who was looking for more income than outcome. Right? Slander because she's a woman, slander because she's a black woman. Frances Willard does the exact same thing to her. What ends up happening, and this talks about power as well, nobody really believed Ida B. Wells. Not a lot of people are coming to her talks because people are effectively attempting to shut down her voice. It wasn't until a Brit himself, who is in a high power position, went over to the United States and actually witnessed this in the newspapers, the retellings of lynchings. He came back and said, we should believe Ida B. Wells because she's telling the truth. So you wouldn't believe an African-American woman on her own. You have to have somebody, and this is also a class issue as well, that here you have somebody who has a lot of power in Great Britain who suddenly supports her, and then she's listened to. Right? We can bring this back home to the American feminist movement as well. Ida B. Wells versus, it looks like court cases, right? Ida B. Wells versus Alice Paul. Who knows who Alice Paul is? Some of you should know who Alice Paul is. Who's Alice Paul?
She's an American feminist.
Yeah.
Did led a lot of protests on Washington. She chained herself to the front gate of the White House.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So she is kind of the archetypal American radical feminist coming into the post-war period. Now, Ida B. Wells and Alice Paul, they try to work together for a while, but Alice Paul, after a while, there's a big concern in feminist circles that black women are going to take away from the voice of the suffrage movement itself. And the reason they think this, they're very worried that white middle-class Southern women won't participate in suffrage marches if they allow black women to participate as well, or they give them equal status in those marches. What happened is in a very famous march, Alice Paul made a ruling that black women, you were going to break up all the suffragists by their state and by their colleges, depending on who they wanted to march with. Black women representing Howard University, which is a traditionally black university, wanted to march along with the college contingent. And Alice Paul made the ruling that black women needed to march in a segregated unit at the back of the parade. Ida B. Wells got involved at that point and informed them that black women just were not going to march if that was the case, that you can lose this contingent or you can lose this contingent, but you're not going to have them both. What they decided to do at that point was allow black women to march with their states, but the contingent from Howard University actually were surrounded by white men walking through the parade to separate them from the white women. So you have white women, men, and then black women. Right? So again, that gets us to some of the intrinsic problems with that color line in feminism in general. Right? We can move on as well. We can go to second wave feminism. There's a lot of complaints in second wave feminism about the idea, because at the same time you have at the same time you have second wave feminism, you also have Latina movements that are very vibrant, Asian American movements. You have the black, the Black Power movements. You have, black feminism, or really critiquing all of these movements. This very white middle class nature of feminism in and of itself. This is a really famous statement made by the River Collective. They're black lesbian feminists who want to critique why it is that their voices, not just as black women, but also as lesbians, aren't being included in this movement. That lesbians are being ignored as well. Anything that takes away from that big discourse of white middle-class feminism is something that's seen as taking away power, as I've said before. So we're a collective of black feminists During that time, since 1974, we have been involved in the process of defining and clarifying our politics, while at the same time doing political work within our own group and in coalition. The most general statement of our politics at the present time would be that we are actively committing to struggling against racial, sexual, heterosexual, and class oppression, and see as our particular task the development of integrated analysis and practice based on the fact that the major systems of oppression are interlocking. Right? So their argument, just like Sojourner Truth's argument, is that you cannot study, you cannot focus on feminism in a vacuum. That feminism is part of an interlocking, complex matrix of domination. And without addressing the other issues, without addressing the economics, without addressing race, without addressing sexuality, without addressing gender, then you're losing your opportunity. You're not going to win the battle, right? So here we have, you know, almost 100 years later, people saying the exact same thing that Sojourner Truth said. This gets us to third wave feminism. Because even though that critique is there, that critique is often shut down. If you're really interested in really starting to think critically about feminism, I always tell people to start with bell hooks. I think bell hooks has one of the most elegant writing styles, and she has some of the best ideas out there. She's writing quite prolifically in the 1990s. And bell hooks, yet again, right? Here you have somebody in third wave, the wave that we're in, the wave that that woman who was waving the sign is in, saying that, you know, I wouldn't start with blackness, I wouldn't start with gender, I wouldn't start with feminism. I would start with stripping down to what is fundamentally informs my life, which is that I'm a seeker on the path. I think of feminism and I think of anti-racist struggles as part of it. But where I stand spiritually is steadfastly on a path about love. But again, all of these things are interlocking ideas that have to be unpacked, and they can't exist in vacuums. And without acknowledging that, you can't do the work you've set out to do. Here's another great quote by her. Feminism is a movement to end sexism, sexist exploitation, and oppression. Its aim is not to benefit solely any specific group of women, any particular race or class of women. It does not privilege women over men. It has the power to transform in a meaningful way all of our lives. Feminism as a movement to end sexist oppression directs our attention to systems of domination and the interrelatedness of sex, race, and class oppression. Feminism as liberation struggle must exist apart from and as a part of the larger struggle to eradicate domination in all of its forms. We must understand that patriarchal domination shares an ideological foundation with racism and other forms of group oppression, and that there is no hope that it can be eradicated while these systems remain intact. 1990s. We keep seeing the same story over and over and over again. And what's really interesting is it's during the 1990s that all of a sudden you have a lot of white, well-educated, middle-class young women who start to write very similar things to bell hooks. People like Naomi Wolf, for example, who don't unpack the issue of race, who don't unpack the issue of class. There's a variety of others as well, who still look at a very narrow view of what feminism is and what it can possibly offer. Whereas you have bell hooks in the background. A lot of young feminists have read bell hooks before, right? But thinking about how to apply it to their life is difficult. But now all of a sudden, you know, in the past about 10, 15 years, we have a lot of people who write about particularly about these issues. This intersectionality is what we call it, how all these things intersect. Like it's all a network of roads. And what that means and how we can start breaking apart those intersections and unpacking them and examining them. But the people who are getting the big publishing contracts are white and middle class. And a lot of the times they don't acknowledge where their ideas even came from, right? Like I said, with stealing blogs and ideas from blogs, with rewording people like bell hooks. They get the big publishing deals, and it's presented and it's lauded as this is third wave and this is so new. But we know now it's not new. These are things that have been said for over 150 years at this point. Which gets me, like I was so frustrated. I was talking to another professor today about the feminist movement. And I was talking about how much it frustrates me that had we done the work that Sojourner Truth told us to do, where would we be now? We would have won. I'm determined. We would have won. I don't know what we would have won, but we would have won. So this gets us back to this. And so one of the things that I've been thinking about, we can complain about this sign as much as we want. We can be horrified by it. But we've got to think about what's going on in our own society that allows people to think that this is perfectly appropriate. And for other people, it's not just her. The amount, thousands of people on the internet who supported her and said, how could you possibly have an issue with somebody carrying a sign? This is so stupid. You're getting touchy. You're being politically correct, right? We'll get to that term in a second. But you know, one of the things that we have to think about here is the idea that words have meaning, and that you can't get away from this idea that words are powerful. They have a history. You can't just decide to use whatever words you want, or else, I mean, think about it. If we just all made up words and talked gobbledygook all the time, nobody would ever get anywhere, right? It'd be funny, but nobody would ever get anywhere. So words have power, words have a history. That history, you cannot implement change of that history. You cannot decide to manipulate that history. It doesn't work, right? And you definitely cannot reclaim a word that did not originally damage your group. Or maybe even damage your group to the point that it damaged other groups. So words have the power to heal, and they have the power to hate. And I think that's very important to think about here, because that's one thing we're going to be talking about in just a second. You know, sometimes they change their meaning over time, and in rare cases, you can reimagine and re-empower a term. But in most cases, hateful words continue to cause damage, you know, even if the intent of the co-option of that term is good. So let's talk about the problems. Why did that happen? And why is it that I'm so frustrated all the time? Y'all are going to help me fix that today. So let's talk about diversity. Everybody talks about diversity nowadays. It's very, very important, apparently, to everybody, except for in implementation. So there's an awful lot of people talking a very, very good game about how you need to think about diversity, how you need to think about, how you need to think about the ideas that are spread and who they're coming from, and making sure that representation of different groups and different opinions are shown. That's all well and good, and it's a really valuable idea, and I think that it's definitely true. But there's a second step to diversity a lot of people abandon, which is actually listening to those voices that you added to the mix. There's a lot of people, one of the big complaints about diversity is you're faking it, right? You're forcing this to happen. You're forcing this diverse element to occur. But you know, the issue with diversity, and this has always been a big thing, even if you want to think, I said, we're just using feminism as case study here. You can think about this with the Occupy movement. There's a big complaint that, oh, no, you can't talk about any other issues besides what the people who are in charge of the Occupy movement tell you can talk about, because anything else will destroy the movement. And that's been a big idea for a while, that movements have to be directed, they have to have a focus, they have to have a message, and they can never diverge from that path. And they have all this historic evidence that they cite regularly about, look what happened when the feminists started getting involved in SNCC, then the civil rights movement started to suffer. Right? Had they just stuck to the path. Black feminists are constantly shut down during the civil rights movement because they're told that black feminism has nothing to do with civil rights, or that it's taking away from the message. And so people constantly cite these issues. Look what happened. Look what's happening to Occupy, right? They started to talk about other things, and now they started to fraction. But what they don't look at and what they don't evaluate is why that fraction occurred in the first place. And largely it's because people who are involved in the movement, who try to broaden the movement and bring their diverse experiences into that movement and be integrated fully, those ideas into that movement are ignored and shut down. And thus the movement starts to fracture because it turns into infighting. Had you actually fully believed in diversity in the first place, had you believed, I'm including these people not because it looks good, or not because I think that by numbers or percentages we should include that voice, but rather I want us to think differently. I want to think critically. I want to change my entire perspective, and I'm going to be open to that. Until that moment happens, diversity is a wash. Right? So that's one of the things that we're going to work on here in a minute. The other thing we have to talk about is the term political correctness. So political correctness, I can give you a brief history of it. You might not have ever really thought that, you know, a term like that might have a deep history, but actually the first usages of the term political correctness from the 1700s. And it meant, basically, it was a political term. It meant whatever the policy of the state or that government, specifically as the president, or the Congress, that meant if you're siding with them, that's politically correct. In the 1970s, it re-enters people's vocabularies, and it's actually used by the left, the new left in particular, as critique. It's sarcasm. They use it to caution each other about getting too orthodox, getting too hardline about issues. And then it's co-opted by the right, by people like Rush Limbaugh, for example, as a way to critique anybody who talks about issues that are near and dear to the hearts of the new left. So in part, I kind of encourage you to let that go. Actually, I could talk to you about why this came about, why people thought this was important. We can talk about linguistic or cognitive psychology and cognitive linguistics. There is an understanding, this has been proven, that words, believe it or not, actually have power. And there is an understanding that you can wield words against people to control them. This has been largely accepted. And what cognitive psychologists ask people to do, and cognitive linguists as well, is to think about the words that you use every day. That's, the whole idea of political correctness, whatever you want to call it. It was supposed to be, a discussion about civil society. How do we create, in a very diverse world, right? How do we create a platform where everyone is encouraged to speak? And speak openly. That's the only way you can have a real conversation, if people are being honest and not reactionary. And the only way that you can really do that is to think about the words you use, particularly stereotypes. Stereotypes, it's the stupid man's game, right? The idea that you just constantly revert to stereotypes because that you don't have to think if you just keep thinking in stereotypes. You don't have to critically evaluate your world. You don't have to actually think about who you are. You can just very easily react. And within this whole construct, without thinking about creating a balanced civil society, an open civil society where people feel comfortable to express their opinions, what you have are people being reduced to stereotypes. And when you're reduced to a stereotype, people keep using that stereotype. And when people keep using that stereotype, people start to make arguments about how they should be able to reduce your privileges in that society based on those stereotypes. So the words, those stereotypes you use in conversations, they're a self-fulfilling prophecy after a while, right? And they're actually used as power in order to limit the possibilities for other human beings and the opportunities that other human beings have in their state. And that's the thing. Stereotyping is often not intentional. Nobody sits there and like, I'm going to stereotype you today, right? People really rely on those stereotypes, as I was saying before. They're cheap and they're easy. You don't actually have to think. You don't have to think about yourself in that conversation, and you don't really even have to think about the other person as a human being. You can just reduce everything to stereotypes. You can talk about those people and that group, and you don't have to think critically, and it's easy, right? That's why it's cheap and easy. So the deal is that the understanding of political correctness was that we were going to refuse to tolerate those words. It's not awful. Like, think about all the times you've heard people like slander each other with, oh my God, you're being politically correct. If the objective was that you actually wanted to, refuse to tolerate these ideas, and that you wanted to actively work towards the construction of a civic society, it's not exactly a horrible thing to be called, right, at that point. So the issue here is thinking about people as individuals and thinking about individual experience. That's what it all comes down to. Because if you do that, you can't use stereotypes anymore. So refuse to accept that, right? To refuse to tolerate that. And then if you keep thinking about language, if you keep thinking about how you talk about groups, if you keep thinking about what you think about certain groups, if you keep thinking about the language that you use on a day-to-day basis, then what you're doing is actually constructing an environment in which an open, honest dialogue can actually happen, that you can learn things about yourself and other people can learn things about themselves. Right? But it creates an equal playing field in that dialogue where nobody feels as if they're being reduced and ignored. So then you might think, dear God, how do we even do that? Right? So we have to talk about the word privilege as well within this. So there's a few things that you have to accept here. Privilege is not a bad word. Say it after me. Privilege is not a bad word. This is another one of those terms that's been co-opted. People are like, oh, everybody thinks that privilege, you know, if you're privileged and they say that you're privileged, then that means that you're a horrible person. If they do mean that, they're kind of a jerk and you should just ignore them, right? But the deal is that it's really not a bad word. Thinking about privilege and thinking about your privilege and my privilege and other people's privilege is the idea that who are these people as an individual? What has their experience been? How is it different than mine? So one of the ways that we can get away from, this idea of movements and people just being completely ignored, how we can fix this conversation that sometimes feels irrevocably broken, is through acknowledging privilege and understanding that it's not a bad word. So basically what this means is understanding your own biography. Who are you? What class do you come from? Do you have learning disabilities? Do you have other disabilities? Are you gay? Are you straight? Are you transgender? What race are you? Right? What's your ethnicity? What language do you speak? Is this your native language? There's a variety of different fields. You can go on and on and on and on from this. But there's a variety of different things that make us up, these little building blocks that make each one of us up as individuals. That's how we can start to evaluate. Our biography is how we start to evaluate our own privilege. So you don't need to feel guilty about your privilege. You shouldn't feel guilty about your privilege, and you shouldn't apologize for your privilege. That's been accepted. That's been understood. If somebody wants you to apologize for your privilege, what are you supposed to do? Apologize for your upbringing? That doesn't even make sense. Right? So the other thing that you need to keep in mind is that privilege is not about you. Now, I just talked about your biography and everything else, so that doesn't sound like it makes a lot of sense. But it's not about you. When somebody tries to talk about privilege, that doesn't mean that somebody's necessarily attacking you. If they're talking about one of those little building blocks that you acknowledge that you're privileged within. Right? That's the moment. I mean, when you start reacting personally, you've lost the game, right? You've lost your ability to have that conversation. So think about it like this. It's what you're allowed to do, what you're encouraged to do, what's permissible for you in a society. It's about how, frankly, you're accommodated in certain aspects of your identity by society in general. People who lack privilege in those little pieces of identity that make them up, those are people who are being de-accommodated, right, with that facet. So also keep in mind as well that privilege is not a contest. I guess people try to make it a contest. It's like competitive suffering 101 or something. You're never going to win that, by the way. So it's this idea that, like, if one team scores a point, against the other team, then now you have to score a point, right? That's not going to be a good conversation. It's going to be ugly. You can't purchase privilege credits. You can't, like a business kind of purchases carbon emission credits or something, or that a churchgoer does good works. Privilege cannot be balanced, nor can it be negated. So just because you might be disadvantaged in one area doesn't mean you score a point against somebody else, right? That's a good way to shut down any conversation. You say that you lack privilege here, but I lack privilege here, therefore we're equal. It doesn't work that way. So the steps. I've come up with the easy plan for you. But it's tough, right? And we fail, and I fail at times with this. But this is kind of a path that I've undertaken because I passionately believe that we can, if we're ready to do this, if we're all ready in this room to do this, we can fix things. Number one, understand how privilege works. Best way to remember it is privilege. If you are privileged, it's like riding a bike on a flat surface that doesn't have any potholes, right? Just this clean ride. You can enjoy yourself. Everything's really easy. You're going really fast. There's no roadblocks. There's no stop signs. Once you start to feel those bumps, that's where you know, right, that you're disadvantaged. Those are things that hold you back. They slow you down. You don't have that nice, smooth ride anymore. It's, think about it like that. And as I said before, it's how society accommodates you. Second, you have to acknowledge that you have privilege. And I know, I just saw some heads shake. I know everybody in here wants to think that they don't have privilege, but every single person in this room does. And that's one thing that we all have to accept. Do we have different levels of privilege? Absolutely. Are some people more privileged than others? Absolutely. But let me just throw it out here. You being able to take the time to come and hear a lecture at a college in the middle of the day and let me torture you for 2 hours, that means you're privileged. Other people in this society wouldn't be able to take that time off and wouldn't be able to do it. So just right there, I mean, that shows you some of the things that we're talking about here. Education, right? Ableism, sexuality, gender, race. I mean, all of these things fit in together. And like I said, you don't have to apologize for who you are. However, there's a caveat to that one. You have to understand, and this goes into number 3 here. Discover what privilege looks like. That's your conversations that you have with people. Ask questions of people. Now, don't expect people to fix your lives, and don't expect them to explain things. It should be pretty obvious. But if you really want to learn about somebody, ask them questions. And this is the hard part for all of us, and I know it's hard for me. Shut your mouth when they're answering, right? I love to interrupt people. It's my favorite thing to do. Apparently, half the time I don't even know I'm doing it. It's like programmed into me or something. I can say that, right? But it's just an excuse. I just love the sound of my own voice. But the issue here is listen to people, listen to their story. Don't react. Don't think, the thing that you got to acknowledge here, it's not about you. It's not about what the words they say that comes out of their mouth means about you. You're listening to their story. And it's teaching you something if you can sit down and critically evaluate that story. It doesn't matter how it fits into your life. It doesn't matter if you feel that they're attacking you. You shouldn't be thinking that. You should be listening. The other thing that you have to think about, like I said, you shouldn't apologize for your privilege, but you also have to acknowledge something else. Your privilege does not give you an excuse to do whatever you want. So in other words, oh, I'm sorry, it just must be my privilege, right? That's why I said that stupid statement. You can't use it as an excuse for behavior. The idea behind this is that you evaluate your behavior. You evaluate how you think about the world. So it doesn't make you a bad person, but you also can't use it as an excuse. Number 4, let's get into the same kind of topic. Learn how to discuss without reacting. Understand that if somebody says something, it might not be about you. And it probably isn't about you because they're talking about themselves, and not everything revolves around us. I know we all think that we are the sun in the solar system. And I get into this habit as well. They must have been doing that. I saw them give me a funny look, right? They must have been, I passed somebody's office and I heard what they said. They must have been talking about me, right? Because, everything revolves around me. But that goes back into that whole Queen Elizabeth stuff. So learn how to discuss without reacting. If you find yourself thinking, but I'm not like that, you're doing it wrong, right? And then that's when you just pull back a little bit and you think, I need to be focused on listening. So don't focus on your reaction, focus on the speaker. Also, I always like to throw this in here, and I said this at the beginning of the talk and you all laugh, but is a qualifier and also a body part, right? So the idea, when you start to say things like, oh, I'm a feminist, but, and then you say something horrific. Anytime you hear yourself and you say, but, I'm a white guy too, but stop. Just close your mouth, because nobody wants to hear what's about to come out of it, right? That's that qualifier. Anytime you start using that, walk away, right? Just stop and refocus on listening. Number 5, that goes back in that whole thing we were talking about with political correctness. And I don't, if you don't want to use that term, don't use that term. Think about creating open communication, right? So construct an open language focused on cooperation. Do you ever notice, and I do this a lot of the time, some of us focus a lot on talking about you when they're talking. So when you go down the street and you do this and you do this, that right there is kind of like, people are like, I didn't do anything to you, right? I don't know why you're so focused on me. So think about how you talk to people. This goes back to those stereotypes as well. Think about the words you use to describe people. Sometimes people will use terms you don't like, but you know what? It's not about you. One of the things that I don't use and that you will see, some second-wave feminists use is the word women with a Y. They take out the E, right? And they say that they're changing the meaning of the word, W-O-M-Y-N. See, you made a face, so now you have to go sit in a corner. I might not like that, and I might not want to use it, but that's about another person's choice. You don't get to decide for other people what language they use and what terms they utilize to describe themselves. I don't care that you don't like it when people call themselves African American. We hear this all the time. I don't like it, I don't care that you don't like the word feminist. It's not about you. So what you might want to do in that case is, have that conversation. Why are they using it? At the very least, you get an education out of the choices that they made and why they made them. Right? But otherwise, it's not in your purview to decide why it is, what language people use, what descriptors that they use. The other thing is, we all get into the habit of starting to apologize a lot, like, oh my God, my privilege is showing, right? Which is really funny when people say that, and I start giggling maniacally, but like if their slip is showing or something. Just acknowledge you made a mistake and move on. The worst thing that you can do is suddenly refocus the entire conversation about how you accidentally refocus the conversation on yourself. And then you have to have this conversation where everybody has to absolve you of your sin and tell you, no, I don't think you're a racist, right? I don't think you're a misogynist. It's all right. No, shh. It's all right. Let it go and just move on. Apologize and let it go, right? Even if you're not quite convinced that you did something wrong, somebody else is mad at something that you said, so that's when you have to have that conversation about why. Right? But it's that conversation that matters. If you start to get away with all this other stuff, it's like bedazzling a conversation, right? It gets all shiny and pretty and nobody knows what to talk about anymore. So you need to keep focusing on that conversation, on the points that, that people are making. The other thing that I wanted to make a point about, and I should say one more thing. It's your responsibility to stand up for others. Within this construct. If you want to go down this path and you want to think about privilege, it is your responsibility. If you want to construct civil society, if you want to make the world a better place, you need to get off your butts, and when you hear something or you hear somebody using a term, have that discussion. But think about it. I mean, you're in a big room full of your classrooms, right? You're in a big room full of students and somebody just lets loose with something and everybody just sits there quietly. Everybody's really uncomfortable. That's your time to say, that language makes me feel uncomfortable and this is why. It's all right to start that conversation. That's what it should be. It shouldn't be, oh, that's it, fight, right? But rather, let's have this conversation. I want to talk about that term. It is your responsibility to do that in every case. Whether or not you're tired or haven't had your coffee or whatever. The final point that I want to make about these issues is there's a lot of talk in the United States about empathy. Anybody know the difference between empathy and humility? Or even what empathy is? Give me a definition. Yeah.
When you can actually feel the other person's emotions.
Okay, so it's when you can actually feel, and you find, so even maybe it's not the whole story, but something in their story that you can latch onto, that you have a personal experience with, that you can understand that emotion, right? Somehow, even if it's in an abstract form. Yeah? I heard, what did you say about empathy?
Empathy can be condescending, where humility is putting others before yourself.
Well, I don't think that empathy necessarily is condescending. I think that the difference here that we're talking about, empathy becomes a stumbling block when we talk about privilege in a way that humility doesn't. So I have up here for number 6, try humility and not empathy. And I'll get back to this, just give me a second, I'll get back to this issue in a second. I just want to finish this up and go on to the next slide. The final thing is, if you feel like you've failed, pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and start again, right? This isn't something that you immediately lose and you're done. It is very, very difficult. It's very difficult to think about our biographies in a real rational way. Who am I? What are my faults? What is my privilege? Where did I come from? How do I annoy people? I don't like thinking about that part. It's hard, and it's a hard journey to take. And it's not something that stops. You can't just be like, all right, I know who I am now. I'm done. I'm awesome, right? That right there says you need to start back over again. But you know, the journey's never done. You change over your life. You have different influences in your life, which means it's a constant process of thinking about, why am I reacting to things the way that I'm reacting? You know, what is going on with me? What's going on with my story? That I don't make sense to myself anymore. That I'm not that person that I wanted to be when I started taking this journey, right? It's all right to fail. Like I said, apologize, move on, start over again, right? But I want to get back to the issue. A lot of people used to say, we all need to be empathetic towards each other. And one of the big critiques of that, of course, was the idea that, yes, empathy is not a waste. Empathy is a nice thing if you have something in common with that person. But what starts to happen during conversations, I'm sure you've heard this before, is the idea that you'll be having a conversation, hear somebody say, oh, that never happened to me, that's not part of my experience, so thus it doesn't, you know, they don't say thus it doesn't count. That'd be a weird conversation. But they just say, oh, that never happened to me. And they just shut the person down. That's the fragility of empathy. Because it depends on the idea that you can always find a beacon in another person's story. So what I would encourage you to do is think more about humility. Now, humility is an interesting thing. It's really interesting to me that sometimes I'll hear people talk about humility and they think that it's powerlessness. They think that there's no power in submission to yourself, right? Humility has been written about. Every major world religion writes about the power of the action of humility, of humbling yourself. And the idea here is that you enter a conversation where you understand yourself. That's part of humility, that you understand yourself and you understand your story. And then you go into that conversation and you humble yourself. It's not about you. It's not about having a reaction. It's about being humbled by another person's story, another human being's story. Right? There's some great quotes up here. Humility is truth by Erasmus. You have a nice, you know, kind of paraphrasing of Mohandas Gandhi. Any attempt to create a lasting truth without humility becomes an angry caricature of the truth, which my argument would be, in my case studies, what I'm worried about is that this is what's happened with third wave feminism, that it's become an angry caricature of the truth because we're not really being truthful. And we're not acting with humility. So I'll leave you, because I love Bell Hooks, as I've said before, I'll leave you with a quote by her. I want there to be a place in the world where people can engage in one another's differences in a way that is redemptive, full of hope and possibility. Not this, in order to love you, I must make you something else. That's what domination is all about. That in order to be close to you, I must possess you, remake and recast you. So I would just, you know, like I said before, this isn't just about the feminist movement. I've been able to really think about these issues of privilege and, you know, just reading news stories and reading about other movements and think about who I am as a human being and as a citizen in the United States. And I think that it's so important for people, it's so important for our society, and it's so important for the construction of civil society, for us all to come to that table humble. Right? And I'll leave you with that. I'll take some questions if you have anything.
Those of you with questions, I'll bring the mic over.
Oh, I was just wondering, is there a reason why Bell Hooks' name is lowercase, or is that just a typo?
That's the question you got? He's in my class, so I'm allowed to torture him. She wants everybody to be focused more on the work, the writings, and her production, right, and her words, rather than her name, like you just did. You know, the idea there, it's kind of a castigation of this focus on who the author is, and that you'll pay them the big bucks because of maybe what race they are, or maybe what gender they are. So it's kind of a symbol to people. You should be focused on ideas, and you should be focused on the works themselves rather than me.
Right. You said third wave feminism has kind of lost the way. And how would you kind of recenter them and get them back towards maybe second or first wave?
I don't want them back at second or first wave.
Well,
that'd be weird. We already got the vote. I mean, not for much longer, apparently, but we've already got the vote. We've still got that. That's about it. But I see where you're going with it. I would say through this process. I think that the feminist movement in particular, that people I would like more people to start talking about experience and to start talking with humility and to start listening to people's stories with humility and to start thinking about building what we should have built 150 years ago, one in which, you know, the idea of diversity is there, but true diversity, the idea that, you know, I don't just include people's voices to include people's voices because it makes me look better that I included their voices. I include their voices because they make what was possibly just, you know, a pretty superficial movement deep and abiding and meaningful. And I think that by constantly ignoring people, and this can even be in your workplace, right? I mean, it doesn't just have to be the feminist movement, but by constantly ignoring people's voices, you weaken yourself and you weaken whatever your passion is, whatever your movement is.
A common theme throughout these sayings is the interlocking connectedness of the problems, of the systems of oppression. I guess it's like a giant tangle of knot. Where do you begin to untangle that? And well, and go. No. and is there a danger though of becoming overwhelmed by looking at the size of the struggle that is yet to come?
Yeah, I think it is overwhelming. I think if, you know, that's kind of the interesting thing. It's like people see all of these different movements, and the movements don't really talk to each other because of the issues that I was talking about now. And I kind of see it as like kind of Lady and the Tramp, where we all have our own movements and our own passions that direct us, that we understand are all interrelated, but we start chewing the spaghetti coming in towards the middle and starting to unravel those problems in our own different ways and unpacking those problems in our own ways. My personal issue is for you know, gender and sexuality in particular. So that's my piece of the spaghetti, I guess. Isn't that a really awful analogy? There's somebody back in the back there.
I'm loud, so I probably don't need a microphone.
We like it for the tape. That's why we're torturing you with it. That, and we'd like to see people flounder with microphones.
Thank you. Jeez, see, that is loud. So I just started an STD blog. And as the administrator, I'm an open administrator on the blog itself, and I'm a female. And one of the things I've been thinking about, but just have not known how I'm going to address this, is I'm worried because of some of the negative connotations with feminism that will be put on it, that this is somebody who's so far out there doing something, you're a feminist. So my question is, how do you think I tackle that? And what's a good thing to say? Because I don't think that's a bad thing.
Right. So you're worried about them saying that, kind of castigating your blog for being more of a feminist blog rather than what you see as the focus of the blog itself?
Right. It's very sexual targeted because of the nature, because it's an STD blog. Okay. And that's my fear, is that will ruin really the intent behind the blog, is to promote awareness, acceptance, education.
Sure.
And be a resource for people.
Well, I mean, I guess that's that conversation, right? I mean, if somebody wants to say that, I would engage them in a conversation about why it is. For one thing, why would it be bad if a feminist talked about STDs? You know, but it does, I see what you're saying. It does come up, and it gets really weird where people are like, I don't have to listen to your advice about STDs because you're a feminist. It's like, okay, well then don't. I don't know what to tell you, right?
And I want to reach so many other people who may be from the other side of the fence and even in opposition of the feminist movement, you know, so that is a big fear.
I think that, you know, I think that issues like this, the word feminist has become so dirty, which is just really weird. I mean, it is really weird to me about how, you know, how people utilize it as a tool and a weapon against women. You know, so, I mean, what I would do is if people wanted to have that conversation, have a space to have that conversation in, but what I would do is, if that honestly is your worry, I would constantly reiterate that this is open to a variety of different groups, and you're really welcoming of all of their different ideas.
Male and women, all races,
yeah, exactly.
Sexual orientations, everything.
Yeah,
right,
absolutely. Right. You know, and I think that, as I was saying before, I mean, you know, me as a feminist, I see feminism as a social justice movement, and I don't see any of those groups precluded, men or, you know, issues of sexuality, like whatever you can think of. I think that it's part of our job to equalize society in general for everybody, whether we're talking about issues of poverty or economics or domination. I think you can have, I think that what more people should have is that conversation. And for you to reiterate your point and say, I don't really see this as a political topic. I'm doing this for the betterment of everybody in Grand Rapids right now, or in the state, or in the blogosphere right now. That's what
Thank you. One last quick question. I'll take this off the microphone. I was just in the vagina monologues, and one of the monologues that I participated in, there were a couple, but was reclaiming cunt. And earlier on, you were talking about the, with the slut movement and with reclaiming these derogatory, negative words. And I'm imagining you've seen the vagina monologues perform just because of the nature of your studies. I'm curious what you think about, particularly that monologue in and of itself, reclaiming cunt, as well as the vagina monologues as a whole.
See, I just totally interrupted her. I told you guys.
It's okay.
I mean, I don't actually remember that. It's been a long time since I've seen that. I don't I know that some people's purpose, they really like this idea of reclaiming terms like slut or cunt or whatever. I just think there are better words to use, I guess, is my thing. I mean, I think that it doesn't really do much. Like, what exactly are you reclaiming if you reclaim that word? I mean, and I know the arguments. I know the counter arguments to this: the power, the domination, the idea that women are submissive, that the women are only the tally of their body parts. Right? I understand how that is some people's agenda, and I would fully support people doing it. Right? For me personally, I think that in order to construct a civil society, I mean, my argument would be, please don't call people that. Go figure, right? You shouldn't call people sluts, because it's weird, and it's crass, and it's really rude. The same thing with the word, I mean, the word, I saw people in the audience when you said the word out loud where they were like, oh, God. And all of Grand Rapids just did it, too. But I see, I find validity, and I see where young feminists in particular are going with that. To me, that does not construct a civil society. Because what the idea should be is we don't talk about people like that. We don't use that. I wouldn't use pejoratives for men. I wouldn't use pejoratives for races. Those stereotyped words that I was talking about before. You can't do that and have a real conversation. And just what, you're just gonna willy-nilly use that word all the time just to reclaim it? I mean, you're actually just re-entering it into common parlance at that point. And you're still gonna have all these poor people up front be like, oh God, right? Every time that it's used. I like that, that's kind of the funny thing I've heard, I saw that monologue and people are like, I'm reclaiming this word. And everybody in the audience the whole time was like, oh my God, she said it again. But the thing is, like, yes, you hear really crass people use that word as a pejorative against women. You rarely actually hear that word used. I don't hear that word used very often. Let me tell you, I've been called the gamut. I have gotten caught it before. Never you mind. But I think that the idea of reclamation, those words mean different things to different populations of feminists. And it's been used differently against different people. And so to me, I just really don't think that my personal opinion is I don't think that you can really reclaim words. I really don't.
Do you think religious equality can be achieved given the fact that it is patriarchal, and do you think it's paradoxical trying to achieve it?
Did you say religious equality?
Yeah.
Well, I think there's some religions that do a smack-up job of it. I think some confessions of different religions do a very good job of it. I think that just like with any kind of a political movement, any kind of social movement, anything that you can imagine, there are problems. I think that some, and I'm not going to sit there and be like, that church is better than that one, right? But I think that some, you can look at the Catholic Church. Some priests and some nuns are very serious about gender equality, and others aren't. I think that over time it'll become a bigger message in religion in general. But I think there are a lot of religions that are based in part on that kind of equality as well. So, yeah, that'd be my answer. I don't know if it was a good answer, but it's an answer, right? I'm totally mellow with my bad answers. I'm like,
Is Zoroastrianism included?
Indeed, sir. Our platform for the Zoroastrian army, this is a private joke, I apologize, is definitely a gender egalitarian army for when we take over the world.
I know that in the In
Yes,
the
sir.
civil rights movement, there were white people working in tandem with the black people for equality and desegregation. In the all three waves of the feminist movements, have there been men working with women?
Yes, every single one of them. Particularly in the first wave in particular, they're in pretty large numbers because it bandies up with the abolition movement at that point, and they see this as natural discourse about freedom and liberty. In second and third wave, yes, men are definitely active constantly in the movements as well. I think they don't get enough voice, and I don't think they get enough credit. I think that's one of the problems with the movement. I think that if there was more highlight, I'm not saying like it should be all about men, right? Because that would kind of defeat the whole purpose of feminism. But I think that we really should highlight more often, particularly for younger men who think that it's only women, that we should highlight the contributions that men have made a little bit more than we do. There's a men's Tumblr, for example, right now. It totally flew out of my head what it's titled. But one of its purposes is to highlight men's participation in the movement. But I think we need to get better about it.
What do you think of the phrase "that's so gay" still used by young adults and teenagers, and do you think that it's going to affect the the connotation and how it could make it a derogatory word from being a neutral word?
That's not people reclaiming it. That's people being kind of stupid. I mean, I'm just going to be frank about it. People who use that, it's what I was saying before. You don't get to reclaim another word for somebody else. You don't know what pain that's caused people growing up. People who use that term don't think critically. It's a stereotype. That's so gay. What does that even mean, right? Within that construct. So it goes back into this again. You have to think about the words that you use, and you have to think about what they mean to other people. No, I'm not okay with that word. Not at all. And I think that, again, it's one of those things. It's like the elephant in the room. People say something like that in a room, and you just see people just wince. And that's when I say, that's your job then, to stand up and say, whew, you've got so many problems in just your use of one word. You need to just step back and rethink what you were trying to say, right? I think, again, it's not about completely shutting people down. It's about having a conversation about the term. But no, you can't reclaim it if it's not yours. And I think that, if you read the people writing about it within the gay community in and of itself, it's a very painful word. And it feels like a slap in the face when it's used. So I think that, again, it's one of those words that, why would anybody want to have a conversation with somebody who said something like that? I don't know if that answers the question, but yeah, it goes back into all of this again, right at that point.
Thank you.
Time for one more question.
Wrap it up.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Williams.